So this is an introduction to the engineering design cycle. I know we kind of had an introduction already where we looked at the process and made our own flow chart, but today we're going to look at the steps, each one of them, to see kind of how it works. So after this activity, you guys will be able to explain the stages and steps of the engineering design process, identify the engineering design process steps in a case study of a design build example solution. We're going to pretend to build something. 3, determine whether a design solution meets the project criteria and constraints. Those are some vocab words we're going to be working on. Think of daily life situations or problems that can be improved, and apply the engineering design process steps to develop their own innovations to real life problems, and apply the engineering design cycle steps to future engineering projects. So what is the engineering design process? It is a series of steps that engineers work through in order to define and solve problems. The first one is you have to identify a problem. This takes observation skills. So just like we learned before in observation, you need to look around you and identify the problem. Then number 2, you have to define it clearly. So tell each little part of the problem, give its constraints and everything like that. So things that will hold it back. 3, develop a plan or a solution. Number 4, evaluate that solution. 5, test that solution. Build it, test it. Number 6, optimize it, which means make it even better. And then 7, communicate your solutions to this problem. This is from our textbook. So this is an outline of the engineering design process. You can see up at the top here that you need to identify the problem, okay? Research previous solutions to the similar problem, see if any of those might work. Define the problem in terms of criteria and constraints. Is the problem well defined? If it's not, you really have to go back and look at those criteria and constraints. So the criteria are the things that it needs to be, and the constraints are the things that it cannot be. So it needs to, like a car, it needs to be able to travel 65 miles per hour. It cannot cost more than $25,000, okay? Once it's well defined, then you can brainstorm new solutions or modify existing solutions, because remember, you already researched existing solutions to similar problems. Evaluate solutions with respect to the ranked criteria and constraints. So take a look at your solutions, and then look at them with the criteria and the constraints. Which one is the best? Choose and model a solution. Develop and test a model. Does the solution meet the criteria and constraints? No. If not, you need to go back and brainstorm again. If it does, then you can move on to test the solution. So you would build your model or your test. You would consider any trade-offs and refine the solution based on the results of these tests. Does the solution best satisfy the criteria and the constraints? If it's yes, that's your solution. If it's not, go back and test it again and optimize it. This is kind of a more simple one, kind of like what we did on Friday with all the different steps here. Ask and identify, research the problem, imagine and develop, plan and select a promising solution, create, test, and improve. This one kind of skips the whole idea of communication though. Okay, and here's a super condensed version, which I actually really like because it's just got 4 bubbles. And I like the arrows showing that scientists and engineers do not move in a linear fashion. They don't just move from one step to the other. They go back and forth between their ideas. So maybe they start here at identifying a problem and they go through in the traditional manner, but maybe they don't. Maybe they came in and they decided to test something for another project, and it brought up questions about something else. And so then they started here and worked their way around. So they can go any which way. Those arrows show that. All right, we are going to look at a case study. And as I'm moving through the PowerPoint, you are going to see a little red circle light up. This top red circle means identify and define. This one next here on clockwise is develop and evaluate solutions. Then this is test and optimize solutions. And then this one right here is communicate solutions. Okay, so keep your eye out down here because this will represent these things where we are. So definitions, what does it mean to identify and define the problems, criteria, and constraints. So identify the problem. Identification occurs when someone realizes that a problem exists that needs to be solved. Define the problem. Definition occurs when someone realizes exactly what the problem is. For example, we're going to be following this through the end of the PowerPoint. Students realizing they're not getting the work handed back from a teacher is a good example of a problem identification. When students realize that they're not getting their work handed back because the teacher's desk is too disorganized, they have begun to identify the problem. Criteria and constraints. Criteria are the requirements the solution must meet, such as what it must do, and constraints are the limitations on the solution, such as maximum size or budget. Here's the example. Identify a problem. When you see a problem in the world, imagine how you might be able to solve it through engineering. So many problems can be solved through engineering. So here's Miss Anderson. Students in Miss Anderson's English class are frustrated because they never get their work handed back to them. They can see their grades online, but without getting their work back, they don't know how to improve. By noticing that their work is not being handed back, Miss Anderson's class has identified a problem. Okay, look at this desk here. Oh my goodness, so messy. My desk would never look like that. Example, define, specify criteria and constraints. So one way to define this problem is by talking to Miss Anderson. When the students talk to her and ask her why they aren't getting their work handed back, she apologizes and says she has trouble keeping her desk organized and sometimes misplaces assignments after they're graded. By learning that organization is the reason they're not getting their work handed back, the students have defined the problem. The students decide to help Miss Anderson by building her desk organizer. That's so sweet. Based on their discussion with Miss Anderson and their available resources, they develop a list of criteria and constraints for the organizer. So identified criteria must hold at least 700 papers, must take up less than 16 by 12 inches surface area, and it must be movable. The constraints, they only have $5, so it can't cost more than that to build. Okay, we've now moved on to the second circle. You can see the little red circle down here. Definitions, develop and evaluate ideas. Engineers develop ideas by thinking of possible solutions to the problem. So this is the brainstorming phase. No idea is too crazy at this point. Any idea, you're brainstorming any possible thought. Engineers evaluate ideas by considering the pros and cons of the possible solutions. So they go through their list of the pros and cons. They look at the constraints, they look at the considerations and the criteria to determine which of the possible solutions they think they should go with. Example, develop ideas. So what possible solutions can you come up with Miss Anderson's problem? Miss Anderson's students talked to each other and came up with a few different ideas, including a stack of baskets or drawers and a box to organize file folders. Which do you guys think will work best? Go ahead and drop it in the chat. Okay. All right, example, evaluate ideas. So building a stack of shelves or baskets is too expensive. The students realized this when they began looking at material prices. Since it would cost more than $5, the solution did not meet the constraints, so they couldn't do that. Students realized that they could afford to build a file folder organizer, that it would be easy to move and would not take up too much room on Miss Anderson's desk. Based on their evaluation of the ideas, the students realized that the file folder organizer was a good solution to the problem. Okay, now if you look down here, we are now on the bottom circle for test and optimize solutions. So remember, the engineers test solutions by trying them out to see how well they work. That can include building models or developing other solutions like that. Engineers optimize solutions by paying attention to the details of their test and thinking of ways it could be better. So optimize means to make better. They run the test of the solution and they fix it and make it even better. So back to our example. So using materials and tools given them by their school's woodshop teacher, the students designed a small box to hold Miss Anderson's file folders. They gave it to her to try out and see what she thought, so they're going to test it. The first draft is a plain wooden box designed to hold file folders upright. It's very wide and the sides are short, so when Miss Anderson puts the files in, they flop over. Can anyone think of a fix? How could anyone fix this? We're going to optimize it. Can you guys optimize it? Drop it in the chat. Okay, here's how they optimized. With feedback from Miss Anderson, the students realized that they need to redesign the box so that it holds file folders better. They made some changes. So they revised the design and raised the back to support the height of the files and papers. And they also added a board across the center to help her organize her folders. That's optimized. All right, we are on to communicate solutions. Engineers communicate their designs when they explain to others how they were designed, why they are useful, and how others might use them. So for our example, Miss Anderson loves her new desk organizer. It was so easy and inexpensive to make that the students wondered why the school didn't provide them to all the teachers. They wanted to make more organizers for the rest of the teachers, but couldn't afford to buy all the supplies on their own. They created a presentation for the school principal in which they explained why their organizer was useful to teachers and asked for the materials to build more for the rest of the faculty. The principal was impressed by the design and agreed to provide the materials. Well, that's pretty cool, right? So, as you can see, we've gone through all the steps of the engineering design process. And at the end, that solution worked out. They optimized, they tested, they built it, it followed the constraints and the considerations and criteria of the project. It was less than $5, it held all the papers, it did what it needed to do. That is an example of the design engineering process as it works. All right, so now let's see some famous people who've used the design process. We've got Katherine Johnson. So she was sometimes called a human computer because she performed complex math for NASA. Yeah, she helped people explore space. You guys have probably seen her featured in the movie Hidden Figures. She's responsible for identifying and working within mathematical and technological constraints. And her math was so accurate that John Glenn refused to launch until the computer's calculations had been tested against Johnson's math. Leanne Walters and Mark Edwards. When the city of Flint, Michigan changed its water source, big problems began. I don't know if you guys remember this. The city identified the problem. So when it detected fecal coliform bacterium, which is like poop bacteria in the water, Leanne Walters, a local mother, also identified high levels of lead in the water. Lead is actually poisonous to humans, so it can kill you, can give you lots of different issues. She noticed a problem when her twins broke out in red bumps after bath time. Walters teamed up with Mark Edwards, an engineer, professor, and expert in lead corrosion. After testing, he reported that the water in one of 6 Flint homes contained twice the usual amount of lead. The city identified the criteria and constraints when they realized that finding a new water source would cost more money than they had to spend. So one solution was to install water filters in 400 homes, which would ensure safe drinking water in those homes and stay within the budget constraints. But then these filters were tested. 52% of them were found to be defective, so more than half. Because they won a lawsuit, the city now had the funds it needs to replace the pipes. They should be installed this year. And there's James E. West. He's an inventor born in Virginia, and although he had a knack for science and engineering, his family discouraged him from attending college because finding professional work was difficult for African Americans at that time. Nevertheless, West excelled in college, and after graduating, he took a job at Bell Laboratories. Bell Laboratories noticed that the microphones and telephones weren't sensitive enough, so they asked West to design a better microphone. One major constraint of this project was that the microphone needed to be small enough to fit inside of the telephone. West, along with his partner, developed the foil electric microphone in 1964, a small microphone technology that is still used in about 90% of microphones made today. And the last one we're going to talk about today is Jorge Odon. He's a 59-year-old Argentinian mechanic who thought of a life-saving invention during a dream. He identified the problem that forceps damage babies' skulls during difficult births. So if a baby's having trouble coming out of the mom, they use these forceps. They look like big tongs, like for a barbecue. They reach in there and they grab the baby. He imagined that a vacuum-like device might be a safer alternative. He tested this idea by building a prototype and gently suctioning his daughter's doll out of a bottle. The device is now being manufactured by a medical supply company and will be available for use all around the world. It's low cost. That means that people in poor countries will have access to this important medical innovation. So this just kind of shows that engineers are all around us doing different levels of things. It can come to you in a dream. It can come to you while you're looking at a problem dead on. It is solving a problem, and that's how we do it.